Hello everyone, it's the Metal Geek. How y'all doing? If you're watching this video, please be aware that the video you are about to watch is a follow-up video to a video I did before. This video is a follow-up to my Breath of the Wild timeline theory video, and if you haven't seen it, click here, watch it now, come back, check this video out, and let me know what you think. This video is intended to follow up and to answer some of the questions and comments that appeared in my other video in the comment section. Figured it'd be a little bit easier this way to explain it, so here you go. So Metal Geek, how about the Korok? Can you explain the Korok to us? They're in Breath of the Wild, and they're in the adult timeline, so what do you think? Well, the Korok really only do appear in one game at this point, other than Breath of the Wild, and that is in the adult timeline in Wind Waker. But there is no saying that the Korok cannot appear in any of the other timelines. Because let's be clear here, they've only appeared in one game so far. There's been no real developed pattern, as in like they've been in like 2 or 3 games in one timeline, but not in any other timeline. Since they've only really appeared in the one game so far, and they haven't really developed that pattern that I'm looking for, it's really hard for me to use them as a major player towards the adult timeline theory. Well, Metal Geek, how about the rock salt that appears? There is rock salt in the game. Wouldn't that mean the ocean was once covering this land? Well, yeah, it could be actually. This is one of the stronger points for the adult timeline, and I will concede to that. But again, one item doesn't really necessarily mean that it's going to be the end-all and be-all of the theory. For me, I looked at a lot of different things when I came up with my theory. But, you know, with the Korok and the rock salt working together, and it does kind of give a little bit towards the adult timeline theory, it doesn't fully work for me. I haven't really, ignored the rock salt, but I can't use it as a major contender is all I'm saying. Metal Geek, Ganon actually does appear in the adult timeline. So, what about your theory now? I do concede that I actually did make a mistake with that one. Ganon does appear at least once in the adult timeline. Now, a lot of people would say twice because of the end of Ocarina of Time. But I count, or at least the way I see it, the timeline split happens when Link is actually sent back to the past, so anything that happens before or after that is kind of their own separate timelines. Now I get that the unified timeline does bleed into the adult timeline and keeps going because it's kind of the unchanged one. It's Link is sent back and Zelda, the adult Zelda, continues to rule without Link. But because Ganondorf actually turns into Ganon before that point, I actually considered part of the unified timeline. But I still did make a mistake, as in Wind Waker there is the backstory where they talk about Ganon coming back and how he got sealed. But with that said, he still doesn't and can't access his Ganon demon form in Wind Waker itself. He does have a puppet Ganon, but it's actually a puppet. It's not an actual transformation. So that does mean that my theory still holds, even with the mistake, because Ganon doesn't actually appear in Wind Waker other than in the backstory. So there is very little reason to believe that he would be coming back or be resurrected as the Demon Ganon when he was actually defeated and frozen in stone as Ganondorf. The Temple of Time ruins. Metal Geek, you made a mistake saying that the Temple of Time may have been in the Lost Woods, but there's no evidence of it. What do you have to say about that? There still is no real evidence of it, don't get me wrong. Yes, I did read Hyrule Historia. Yes, it does say in Hyrule Historia that there once was a temple in the Lost Woods. And here's an excerpt of that right here on screen. But notice how it says a temple, and it does not say the Temple of Time. Now, I know people are going to say, you're just nitpicking because you want your theory to be right. Well, no, what I'm saying is that, yeah, it's very easy to go that route, to say, hey, this is the Temple of Time, it just makes the most sense. But there is only one truth and reality, and that is because Nintendo did not name it as the Temple of Time in Hyrule Historia, they have left a loophole for themselves to use. Now, don't get me wrong, they may one day come out and just say, yeah, it was the Temple of Time, but they could equally say, hey, because we never actually called it the Temple of Time in Hyrule Historia, we were talking about a different temple altogether. The Temple of Time could still stand in the Fallen Hero timeline if Nintendo wants to use that loophole. And I was basing my theory on as much actual confirmed evidence as I possibly could with my other video. Another major problem, Metal Geek, is that Link is right-handed in Breath of the Wild. He's left-handed in all the other games except for Skyward Sword, so wouldn't it make sense that it'd be Skyward Sword? Well, I mean, sure, it could be the Link from Skyward Sword if you think about it to some extent, but it doesn't really work for me for the following reasons. At the end of Skyward Sword, the pedestal that the sword is placed in is in a small grove. But again, we know that the temple was constructed around it. So, again, 100 years later, it would make very little sense. Remember, this is only 100 years after Skyloft fell. And we've never seen Ganon before. At this point, no, it was Demise that we fought at the end of Skyward Sword. We do know that Ganondorf is a resurrection of Demise. But how would he get bound to the castle? Again, 100 years, in that 100 years span, how could all that happen? It just doesn't make a lot of sense because there isn't a lot of things that are there to build this up at this point. So to me, Breath of the Wild falling after Skyward Sword and this Link is not the one that makes the most sense. Metal Geek, why are you so convinced that this takes place after The Legend of Zelda 2 and that the Link we're playing as is the Link from The Legend of Zelda 1 and 2? Well, simply put, if you look at the timeline, the Fallen Hero timeline, it actually states that this is the final hero. I mean, that can be interpreted in different ways, sure, but to me it sounds like what they're saying is that Link from Zelda 1 and Zelda 2 could very well be the last reincarnation of the Link bloodline in the Fallen Hero timeline. Why? I'm not really sure, but if he is truly the last of the bloodline and he does get killed after Zelda 2, there won't be any links to stop Ganon anymore. It would make total sense that the Sheikah and that Zelda would have to somehow preserve and resurrect Link if he were to die. The only other theory that works for me is if it happens to be the Link from the Ocarina of Time, so, you know, the actual hero of time. But again, there was no suggestion that that Link would be the last, so to me, the Link from Zelda 1 and 2 makes the most sense because Zelda is forced to actually preserve Link. The Sheikah have to keep Link alive or bring him back in some way, because if they can't or they don't, the seal will break and Ganon will actually wreak havoc all over Hyrule again. That is why I think it's the Link from Zelda 1 and Zelda 2. Not to mention, I just feel like the storyline really falls into place, especially with Hylia being part of the timeline again, and I'm going to get to that in a second. So, Metal Geek, is Hylia actually back into the timeline? How do you know? Well, yeah, of course this is speculation, guys, but Zelda is the reincarnation of Hylia. Demise cursed Link and Zelda to reincarnate pretty much for the rest of their, well, forever, actually. But Demise actually kind of cursed himself, because with Zelda being the reincarnation of Hylia, it means that that goddess bloodline actually does flow within her. Each reincarnation keeps that bloodline alive. So when you come to Zelda 2, and you have the whole story of Zelda being in a deep sleep, yeah, it makes sense that the sword would actually rust, that the Master Sword would decay and become a shell of its former self because it's cut off from Hylia's power. Zelda might not be the reincarnation of Hylia complete, but she does have some sort of power over what's going on in this whole thing. And we do know that she does have a connection with the Master Sword. In Skyward Sword, the final form of the sword is unlocked by Zelda, basically by Hylia's power. So if that goddess bloodline is locked away in a deep sleep, that sword could very well rust away. Well guys, I hope that answered some of your questions. I also hope that it gave you insight as to why I picked the timeline that I picked and broke the story down the way I did. And I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, so please comment below. Because this is the Metal Geek saying, have a great one, guys.